Hot on the heels of the Leviathan release, the first tournaments of Warhammer 40k 10th edition have been played. Let's take a look at a few army lists that did well, and what choices players are having success with in the new edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking 10th edition army lists, and I thought it would be interesting to take a look at a few of the more successful army lists from the last weekend worth of tournaments. A few of the events hitting the ground running really quite quickly after indexes dropped, with 3 medium-sized grand tournaments running the 10th edition rules and giving us our first glimpses of what might be at the top in the new edition of the game. For this one, I thought we'd just take a look through a few of the army lists that were interesting towards the top of the placings of these events. In this video we're going to talk about 5 different factions as well, though I'd certainly not take these results out of context. It's going to be a bit of an experimental phase in Warhammer 40k army lists and the meta for quite a while, I think. Lots of people won't have the miniatures they really want to put together their favourite 10th edition army. The rules have only been out for a week or so after all. I think it's still very interesting to see what people are having good success with at this early stage though. Generally, to place highly at one of these grand tournaments, you both must be a decent player and also have put together an army list that is somewhat optimal, or at least for the tournament or the current meta. Let's talk through 5 of those armies then, and why they're looking scary in 10th edition 40k. First up, in terms of armies that have really made an impression over the weekend, it seems that the Imperial Knights have really started 10th edition with a splash. Out of those 3 grand tournaments, they won 2 of them, and also placed 3rd at one of the ones that they won. Winning the biggest of the tournaments was this list by Adam Holland, who used it to take first at Boys Cup GT, going 5-0 against a field of around 50 players. Knights in 10th used that code Chivalric, probably the best one in my opinion is for the rerolls of 1 to hit and wounds, and then they sort of get what's equivalent to the old Tyrannus rules with a 6+ feel no pain, getting better if you get virtuous and slay the enemy's warlord. Kind of what you want for knights in the first place, seeing as they're often exposed to enemy firepower as you'll struggle to hide them both with towering and lots of vehicle holes. In this winning list, it was a Knight Crusader, a Knight Warden, 7 Armigers, including 5 Warglaves and 2 Helverins, and then a Vindicator Assassin as well, who might be able to camp some objectives with his Lone Operative special rule, and also pick off some characters potentially. The Crusaders got the massively upgunned Avenger Gatling Cannon with a big 18 shots, the Rapid Fire Battle Cannon with that fairly crazy rapid fire profile that's really not too hard to get in rapid fire range, loads of AP 1 damage 3 there, and the Questoris Knights might as well take the Storm Spear rockets on top, given that all the top guns are free. The Knight Crusader is a pretty terrifying damage machine. His bondsman ability is to get +1 to the hit roll, so his attacks are going to be super accurate, and he'll also help out one of the Helverins or something. And if he remains stationary as well, and that makes sense, then he gets sustained hits 1 on his weapons as well, another nice little damage boost there on already utterly terrifying guns. In addition, where most things got less lethal, it is kind of surprising that the Knight weapons got amped up by quite a bit, and also their points cost went down as well. The big knights also get that towering rule as well, which means that they can shoot through normally obscuring ruins, so if there's any windows in them, then the opponent might really struggle to hide. Certainly doesn't help when they're firing weapons of this sort of caliber. He's also got the Mythic Hero enhancement as well, to allow him to use that bondsman ability on 2 different knights. Certainly doesn't hurt for some super accurate Melter or Helverins. Otherwise, there's the Knight Warden, the one that gets the Avenger Gatling Cannon, and he gets devastating wounds unless he's targeting monsters and vehicles, so it's even more dangerous on him. His bondsman ability I'd also say is one of the best ones, -1 damage to both him and a bonded armiger, which is pretty massive. Again, durability can be more important than damage for knight lists if they're going to be taking the hit first often. This one goes all in for the durability with unyielding Paragon as well. Enemy AP gets worse by 1 on attacks directed against him. Then beyond that we've got 7 Armigers just bringing a whole load of raw might, 2 Helverins with their AP 1 autocannons now, and a good for the Crusader to buff I suppose, and then 5 Warglaves with their very punchy big melter weapons, plus a bonus melter gun on the top and good generalist melee. Knights look like they're going to be in a pretty tough position to beat for quite a lot of armies, just having too much raw toughness for a lot of armies to deal with unless they skew into enormous anti-tank. 10th edition's whole idea of making small arms less effective against these guys has perhaps made them a bit more of a skewed army. A lot of units with mid-strength weapons that might have been somewhat effective against them, like say heavy bolters, just really aren't so much anymore. Plus beyond that, they've got very scary stratagems, even just standard Overwatch on things like that Knight Crusader could be kind of terrifying, and really quite big objective control values as well, both the Armigers and the big Knights. As mentioned, the Knights have been doing very well in other places as well. Another Knight list took 3rd in the Boys Cup as well, with Canis Rex, a Crusader, a Paladin, and 5 Armigers, and won the other grand tournament of the weekend with a Crusader, a Warden, and Canis Rex, and that one taking 5 Armiger Warglaves and no Helverins. Really not too surprised to see Canis Rex being taken fairly regularly. Even for Imperial Knights he seems to be surprisingly cost efficient at 405 points for all the extra upgrades he gets. With Knights on the rampage like this, I feel like 10th edition tournament lists are definitely going to be wanting to pick up a decent amount of anti-tank fire. Moving on to the other lists, and this Necron list was by Ben Cromwell, who used it to take second at the Boys Cup GT. He went 4 wins, 1 loss it seems. This list is kind of fun, not making use of any Necron warriors that do seem to be one of the main things that Necron players are fixated on a fair bit. Instead, this one is a very destroyer-heavy themes list with a whole load of Locust destroyers and some Scorpex. For characters in the list, there's 2 Hexmark destroyers. They're kind of interesting now with their lone operative and fairly solid options for returning enemy fire in their turn. One of them takes the Sovereign Coronal as well to count other squads as being led by a character for a +1 to hit. It also helps out with a bunch of their stratagems as well, which definitely doesn't hurt. Leading up what I guess would be the big squad of Locust destroyers is a Locust Lord. He has a Resurrection Orb to allow them to come back in both players' turns, and also the Hypermaterial Ablator as well. That's the one that gives you stealth and also cover at long range. Seems like it would be hard to wipe the destroyer unit with that going on. Plus his critical hits on a 5+ are pretty massive as well when you're dealing with a whole load of general purpose Gauss shots that really want to auto wound. Then leading up a squad of 6 Scorpec destroyers is a Scorpec Lord. He brings them all around raw might. Their weapons get lethal hits as well, and he brings some extra mortal wounds. He's also got the Semi-Eternal Weave, which gives him a 4+ feel no pain type save, pretty big on such a massive model. Otherwise, for the core of the army and the destroyers, we've got 3 units of 3 Locust heavy destroyers, really quite a lot of decent fire support there, and they are pretty cheap. 2 of the squads take those very scary damage 6 Gauss weapons, and one of them takes the Enmity Exterminators, so a bit more anti-infantry focused. There's the big squads of the Locusts, who will definitely love the auto wounds on 5s from the Locust Lord. 2 Locust destroyers run individually, kind of handy for screening and objective grabbing potentially at just 30 points investment. The big unit of Scorpex, who like the lethal hits from the Scorpec Lord, and then 2 more destructive units of Canoptic Scarab Swarms, quite cheap nuisance units but can't score objectives. There's also a Spider in the list, who could give you a 4+ save against psychic attacks if that's a particularly big deal in the army that you're facing, and he also has a 6+ feel no pain type save for just any Necron vehicles within 6 inches, so it seems reasonable to have him running alongside the Monolith. He might even be able to regenerate some Scarab Swarms as well if they get depleted, I suppose. Then there's a Doomsday Arc, which now brings some actually serious anti-tank fire support, but still ideally wants to be stationary if it can be. And finally a big central Monolith with Death Rays, really quite a scary threat in its own right, particularly as it'll probably be within range of that Sovereign Coronal, hitting a bit better than it would normally be able to, and with a 6+ feel no pain type save. Looks like there's perhaps a bit less use for its Eternity Gate type rule in this list, as I think the only thing that you could use that on would be the Scorpec destroyers, and they're not able to charge when they do that. Overall though, it looks like a very cool list. Really quite nice to see a big destroyer cult doing pretty nicely in 10th edition 40k. My guess would be that we'll probably see a fair few more Lich Guard and Warriors in more Necron lists going forward, but it's really cool to see that the destroyers seem to have enough raw power to carry themselves. Next up, we've got a Drukhari list doing well. This one run by George McCulloch, who used it to take second at the Hellstorm All-Stars Heat 3, a 40-player GT, and went 4-on-1. In 10th edition, Drukhari lists seem to be shaping up to be a lot more about shooting than about combat, and perhaps as a result this one's a fairly vehicle and monster heavy Drukhari list, plus a few units of troops and some scary scourges. Leading up the list is an Archon and a Homunculus, both of which will allow the army to start on a couple more pain tokens. The Archon in particular is really quite a devastating leader for the Kabbalite warriors. He can allow you to reroll wound rolls of 1, or when the unit's empowered, then as well as rerolling the hit roll, you also get to reroll the wound roll flat out as well. So a pretty efficient and massive boost out of 1 pain token there. Throwing in a spanner of the works to one opponent's stratagems as well with his Devious Mastermind rule just feels like added value at that point. The Homunculus just seems to make one squad of Racks just extra hard to take out. Could be extra nice if a squad just needs to survive, and you also use that -1 to wound stratagem. For the squads, there's a unit of 10 Kabbalite warriors that look like they're riding in the Raider with that Archon. Really quite a lot of damage output between the Dark Lance, Shredder, and Splinter Cannon. They might have been locked at a 10 unit size, but at least they get all of their fancy weapons thrown in for free now. The Racks are also now surprisingly shooty in 10th edition as well, with a Hex Rifle, Liquefy Gun, and Ossifactor as well. 2 of them look like they're going to be riding in the Venoms to contest some midfield objectives, maybe one's just for home field objective camping. The Reavers still move crazily fast with their 16-inch move, and they're taking Heat Lances and the Cluster Caltrops. The Heat Lances are really quite powerful anti-tank shots. There's 5 Scourges with Dark Lances. They've got great movement at 14 inches and can move, shoot, move as well with their Winged Strike special rule. Really quite a nice way to have them popping out and crack off some shots with the very scary anti-tank that they have, and then hopefully remain safe unless the opponent's got Ignore's line of sight shooting. Then there's 2 Ravagers at 95 points each for 3 Dark Lances. They just seem very good value all around. And finally, the rest of the army is just pain engines, 3 units of one single Kronos, which is really quite durable for 50 points, plus they might be able to farm some pain tokens really quite well for use on nearby units. And then there's 3 squads of 2 Talos. They take the Talos gauntlets, twin liquefy guns, and twin haywire blasters. They're basically carrying the battle line of the army. They're quite a good choice for trying to finish off depleted units, as well as if they do so, they get empowered for the rest of the game. Overall, looks like a fun list, and plenty of scary anti-tank shots coming out of them. I think 18 lance shots overall is really nothing to underestimate, plus a whole bunch of haywire blasters on the Talos can certainly help with enemy armour, and they've still got some very fast moving units to jump around the board taking points when they need to. Next up, we've got a Tau Empire list by Hunter Seams, certainly an army that's had a fair bit of pessimism when their index came out, so it is kind of nice to see a list doing well right out of the gate. This list went 4-1 out of the Boys Cup GT, beaten out by the 2 Knights list and a Necron list. I'm perhaps not too surprised to see a pretty hefty amount of cyclic ion blasters on crisis suits here. The gun seems fairly vastly better than the other options available, so basically every single crisis commander and crisis suit has them. They can put out a whole ton of strength 8, AP2 and damage 2 shooting, which is really quite generalist even in 10th edition, though it does come with a hazardous keyword attached, and when you're firing that many of them you might well be taking a fair few mortal wounds as well. Looks like perhaps the core of the list is 2 units of crisis suits, each with 3 of the cyclic ion blasters, 6 shield drones in total, putting the crisis suits up to 6 wounds each, and then a shield generator to keep them safe. They're both led up by a commander, one a cold store commander who can get them moving really quite quickly around the board. He's got a marker and a shield drone, and he's got that rather awesome exemplar of Kauyon enhancement, allowing you to get that from turn 2, so potentially double exploding 6s when you're guided there, really quite massive. The other one's a regular crisis commander, again 4 cyclic ion blasters, this time hitting on 3s, and he can give the squad some innate hit rerolls of 1 as well. Then for the rest of the list, there's 2 units of 10 breachers in Devilfish, really quite nice with their big reroll wound rolls when they're clearing out objectives, though for their fairly high points cost they are pretty fragile to any sort of return attack. 2 units of 5 Vespid Stingwings that could potentially jump on and off the board, going around doing secondary objectives and things, plus their firepower isn't too bad against marine equivalents. There's 3 stealth suits to start in the midfield. They've got a homing beacon, which could potentially allow a rapid ingress early on. Just having some mid-board presence seems kind of nice for screening and objective purposes though. Then to bring a bit more heavy anti-tank to the list, there's 3 broadsides, each with the heavy rail rifles, a seeker missile, and a battlesuit support system to cancel out modifiers. Again, they're going pretty maximal with the shield drones, putting them up to extra wounds on the unit. There's a Ghost Kill battlesuit with his new Lone Operative rule, making him rather annoying to catch up with. He attacks with a Cyclic Ion Raker or Twin Fusion Blasters if the enemy gets close. And finally we've got Commander Shadowsun and a Fireside Marker team, again both with Lone Operative again. Shadowsun giving you a nice hit rerolls aura, and the Fireside team spotting targets for the others no doubt. Overall looks like a solid amount of scary threats, plus a fair few Lone Operatives that are going to be hard to catch up with. Even with all the shield drones though, I feel like the crisis suits and the broadsides are going to go down a bit easier than they did before, without any ablative wounds to tank big shots for them. Looks like a very solid and well thought out town list though, making use of a whole load of good things in their codex. Finally, last but not least, we have the scary Aeldari, perhaps one of the armies alongside maybe Marines and Knights that people are most scared of facing in 10th edition. Very powerful raw damage dealing mechanics with their built-in rerolls and their fate dice, and particularly perhaps the problematic interaction of throwing fate dice at getting mortal wounds on things like D cannons or Wraith Knight heavy Wraith cannons. This list was by Victor Smith, who used it to take first at a tournament that I'm gonna probably not try to pronounce. Apparently it was an event over in Poland with 5 rounds and 27 players. In the list we've got the nice cheap and effective Farseer on foot to allow you to swap fate dice to a 6. He's in a retinue of Guardian Defenders it looks like, and he's got Fortune to allow one unit to be a -1 to wound, which is pretty crazy when you could put that on that great big tanky Wraith Knight. That's going to be incredibly hard to kill with that. The scariest combo with the Fate dice is that the Farseer can turn a, say, 1 or 2 result into an automatic 6 and put it into the wound roll either with the Heavy Wraith Cannon or the D Cannon to basically get something like 2d6 mortal wounds on the enemy that they can't really do anything about. It's even nastier with the Wraith Knight having that towering keyword, potentially meaning that you can't really hide your units behind ruins effectively either. I'd guess that the decans would probably also be chilling by the Farseer. They're very good just in terms of their raw damage output, even for their points cost, and again though are a very nice way to throw 6s into them if you can get them either with the Farseer or your standard roll. Ideally the Guardian Defenders would also want to be towing into a home field objective as well to rustle you up more fate dice. Otherwise for the HQs we've also got an Autarch Way Leaper, He jumps around on his own being a lone operative, but can just farm you command points every turn just from being on the board. I think that's enough to justify his inclusion in the early games just by itself, never mind his battle shock abilities, plus any actual combat he does. Azamon's here and is leading a big unit of Dire Avengers. He can make them fire Overwatch for 0 CP. And they can hit enemies on a 4+ in Overwatch if they're on an objective as well, meaning that they can get a pretty scary round of firepower off both in your turn and the opponent's. Representing the Harlequins, we've got a Death Jester with the Weeping Stones here. Ideally, he wants to be cleaning up depleted enemy units, as again he can farm Fate Dice with those Weeping Stones, but otherwise could just be an interesting enough sniper to try and pick off units with precision. Otherwise, besides the units that were mentioned, we've also got 2 units of Warp Spiders as well. They do that scary flicker jump where they can move basically just 24 inches straight away. They can't charge, but that should be enough movement to basically get the first strike on any infantry they want to try and hoover away with their Death Spinners. Really quite scary firepower, basically being flamers with devastating wounds. The Wraith Knight can just go around the board obliterating things with the heavy Wraith cannons, and also being -1 to wound and -1 damage just by its own rules. Very, very hard to kill. There's a very scary trio of fire prisms to back it up as well. You can just expose one of them to the enemy and then fire the other 2 through that, and they're just spectacularly efficient in their own right at 125 points and re-rolling a single hit and a single wound. There's a Night Spinner for a little bit of ignores line of sight firepower, and then those scary D cannons to do a bit of area denial if the enemy gets too close to the midfield. Overall, looks like an absolutely terrifying Aeldari list, loads of mortal wounds coming at you, and a lot of things that can either hit you out of line of sight, behind ruins, or just with spectacular movement values. I feel like the majority of armies in the game would find this a tricky list to deal with if played by a good player. Not too surprised to see that Aeldari are winning one of these grand tournaments. I'm sure we haven't seen the last from them. So anyway, let me know what you think. Good to see some examples of what's actually working in 10th edition 40k so far. Let me know if you had any other insights or corrections about the army lists, or comments on how they might have been used that I might have glossed over or missed. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or certainly try and keep up with Games Workshop's news and rumours, and details as to what sort of things are doing well in 10th edition 40k. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.